Animal abuse and killings in zoos is my topic for today. All over the world, children are going to zoos and they are amazed at the fact that they are able to see a real-life animal right in front of their face. It is impossible for the small, innocent mind of the child to realize that there is something wrong taking place in the zoo right in front of them. Once I saw upon them was close and personal, I realized that the animals were miserable. A quote from Carr, who works at a zoo in Philadelphia. Zoos and aquariums in Europe kill, abuse, and hold animals in bad environments, either because of inbreeding, overcrowding in zoo, or profit. Animal freedom is something that is taken away by cages and causes animals to become emotionally distraught and depressed. Many cages and environments in zoos tend to seem inhumane to the naked eye. Animals cannot speak to the common human language, so they often need someone on their behalf. Zoos all over the world have veterinarians and psychological workers who help with the animals, but that does not mean that they are speaking on their behalf. They may be working over profit. Displays are not always efficient for the exact animal they are hosting, such as aquariums. Dolphins are some of the most active mammals in the world, and they need a large space, but they are not ever given that. Many zoos have specialized veterinarians, but that does not mean anything, because it normally takes a death in the zoo for the zoo to realize what has been going on. In a sense, animals are held captive by zoos, not only for entertainment, but also for educational and profitable purposes. Animals can spend their entire lives in a zoo from birth to death. A female elephant in the Mali Zoo spent up to 40 years behind a cage. A quote from J.M. Coetzee stated the following: "Her years in the zoo are as heavy as a sentence to bear, longer than is served by most murderers." That is a really mind-blowing quote, because you realize that it is true that some animals will be born in the zoo till their death, and murderers may only have a 10-year sentence. Zoos need to replace the steel bars and green tiles with moats and open spaces. Dr. Vint Virga, an animal behaviorist, said, "To give the animals the sense of control, they need that." Trainers are placed in zoos to deal with the psychological welfare of the animal, proving that animals are not safe in a zoo and are not stable. Many animals with specific problems that tend to emphasize this problem are kept in zoos or will eventually end up in a zoo habitat. Crabs and zebras and also elephants all have different human resources. They all have REM cycles, they all can feel pain, and they will all recognize themselves in a mirror, which means that they should not be kept in a cage. Self-awareness and emotions are very active and prominent in all sorts of animals. Depressions, fears, phobias, and OCD are nothing to put aside when talking about zoos. Obviously, zoos are complete opposite from a natural habitat. Irene Pepperberg states that an animal in the wild can't afford to be depressed. Animals in the wild do not have the time to sit around and do nothing. They must fight and they must survive. If you were to place an animal who was born in a zoo and has lived in a zoo their whole life into the wild, they would not know what to do with themselves, and they would probably die. Virga states in defense of the zoos, "I think that if you could ask her, Molly, the elephant, would tell you that she prefers not to be a leopard's meal. I think she prefers it very much." This doesn't mean that the animals in zoo are always safe from becoming a leopard's meal, though. Known and respected for its high standards and equality regarding the keeping of animals was a quote given by a newspaper in Denmark. This was how the Copenhagen Zoo in Denmark was looked at until an 18-year-old giraffe was killed and then autopsied in front of the zoo visitors and children. The zoo claimed that they needed to prevent the inbreeding and that the giraffe was past the human appealing line. Also, 4 lions were killed in Denmark after only 1 new lion arrived. The small gene pool in Europe played a role, allowing inbreeding to occur, creating an offspring. The National Affairs editor, Bo Sogengrad, states, "Danes are used to being looked upon as the good guys, as people who had put a lot of money into foreign aid and have a high living life. Now when you say you are from Denmark, people say, oh, the giraffe killers." Every year, 5 animals are killed in a zoo. That is a member of the European Association of Zoos and Aquarium. Only 247 members out of 1,735 do not take part in the killings of animals, and that is only including non-members. In Denmark alone, 15 animals are killed per year. In 2012, 22 zebras and 4 hippos were killed in Denmark alone. 3 tiger cubs were killed in Germany, and about 5,000 animals have died in Europe alone. Dr. Leslie Dickey, a member of the EAZA, stated that our estimate for all the animals management euthanized in the zoo be at tadpoles until the giraffe. So that means that zoos were not keeping that on record, and zoos were not telling people that this many animals, they were killing this many animals until the giraffe became public on the news. Animals are a subject of life, and they are complicated psychological creatures. Just like humans, animals love, animals breathe, and animals die. They are very well known of the world around them. A human life and an animal life are the same. They both live and die. Tom Regan states the following, defending the animals caged. If I am in a cage and want to get out, I will try to get out. For example, I will try to widen the space between the bars or push against them. Zoos make the decisions for the animals without their consent. Obviously, an animal cannot tell them whether they want to be in a cage or not, but I think they'd all prefer not. Fears can be unlearned, but phobias can. Virga, a veterinarian, states. Being unable to thrive in enclosures can also affect the animal physically. An elephant walks up to 30 miles a day. With an enclosure not allowing that space, painful arthritis can and will take place. Since animals are placed in zoos with only a limited group of the same species, animals are not given the right to choose their mate, creating depression and aggravation. Some zoos set up a breeding specialist group that chooses mates for the different animals in the zoo. Every zoo will have problems, whether it is the environment, their abuse of the animals, or a zero tolerance for the animal rights. The location of the zoo does not always matter. It does not matter whether it is in another country or if it is in America or which state it's in, but it will play a huge role. Some of the best zoos do not have fair treatment. For instance, they pay attention to the big profit animals and cage up the smaller ones. Zoos may seem like they're allowing the animal's habitat to be adapted to the animals, liking it, but it leans more towards the zoo's profit line. If a zoo does not have a very big profit line, they're not going to make each environment capable for the animal. They're just going to use what they can, like bars. Trophy cases and display shows are what zoos are portrayed as these days. Lindsay Abrams traveled around the world visiting zoos and paying attention to the enclosures, only to say, one zoo provided a good enclosure and 1,000 bad enclosures. Humans are creating wild animals to performers. Zoos supply the entertainment and perspective of the animals for the human enjoyment. Animals are beginning to become systematically deprived. Loss of social structure becomes an issue when the animals are taken out of their natural habitat. There are no kin groups, there are no monarchies, and there are no migratory routes. Clyde Betty states, no jungle animal can be trained successfully by cruelty. Zoos tend to use the punishment system, which if the animal does not agree or if they do something wrong, they are punished for it. This creates the animal to have replaced anger. Obviously, all zoos have a high educational purpose. All zoos will be able to teach you something about an animal. They will be able to show a child how the animal works, but the evidence lacks deeply. Zoos gain more profit if the zoo provides a more educational experience. So it is all leaning back to whether they get their profit that they can put into their environments, but they're not. The more education that is brought to a person's thoughts will stick with them and become a memorable experience. Even though this may seem the case, zoos do not have the best evidence on this, and they do not have enough sources to back them up. Zoos around the world are not all perfect. They do not all hold the correct enclosures or morality. For instance, the Saravia Zoo consists of problems including a lion being hanged in his enclosure to meat, lace, and formaldehyde. The public zoo in Mwambi lets their animals die and displays the dead animals in their own taxidermy museum. Enclosures here are unhealthy and do not meet anti-cruelty guidelines. I have some pictures of different zoos around the world of animals being caged up. They're not color, but here's a tiger locked up in a cage. Pretty small. I don't think that's where they live in real life. Here's a bear, which it looks like he's in a jail cell. And this one is kind of hard to see, but here's another bear in a Japan zoo, and he's just behind bars. In the beginning, the zoos may portray the idea that they are the caretakers of the animals around the world. But once the evidence and truth behind the closed cages is revealed, the realization that zoos are not all that they portray becomes impossible to overlook. Animal abuse and killings do take place. You cannot deny that. Either environments or the treatment of the animal can affect the individual mentally and physically, and there has been many evidence. In conclusion, I feel that zoos are not always the perfect place for animals, and they do abuse and kill their animals. In bad habitats, resolving that nothing good but a depressed animal will come from it.